Hey, in this video we are going to learn how to make 10 cool text animations that you can implement in your projects to animate your titles and hero sections, headings, carousels, and cards using only CSS keyframes. Before we get started, let me first show you a trick that we are going to use in almost every single one of the animations we are going to create. Let's start by creating a parent and a child divs, and then translate the child div 100% of its size on the y-axis. As you see, even though the child div is translated out of the bounds of the parent div, we still can see it. However, we can prevent that from happening by adding the overflow property with its value set to hidden. Now, as a result, the child div disappeared. It is there in the document, yet not able to be seen. Furthermore, if we translate the yellow div 50%, only half of its size will be shown, because moving it that distance will make only half of it outside the parent div, therefore only that part will be hidden. So as you can see, I have some code which is used to center elements on the page, and then another couple lines for responsiveness purpose. Having said that, let's start with the first animation. This animation is essentially composed of two simple phases. The first one is the stretching of that left theme bar, which is created as a left border for the div containing the text and animated by scaling up the entire div from 0 to 1 on the y-axis. The second phase is the translation of the text from outside the bounds of the parent div using the trick we've just seen. So within this container section, I'll be creating each text effect in a div that has the class name of text effect and the number, in addition to effect, which will be used to add some margin in order to create white space between the 10 elements. In this div, we need to have a p tag which contains a span set as a wrapper for another couple of span elements containing the text. I used the HTML code for the space character here to prevent the words from breaking when the size of the window is smaller, which will kind of ruin the animation. Now in CSS we are going to type some common properties for the elements, which we will overwrite in some occasions. So again, the effect class will merely add 40 pixels padding for each animated text. We are making the spans as block elements to create the line break and therefore make the light text on top of the bold one. And then we need to specify the font family for each part. Now it's time for the animation. First, let's create the border and animate it. As you can see, the border animation is done. Now let's move on to the text animation. So we need to translate the text 100% of its size to the left, but notice that we have an additional space that is still visible on the parent element, and that's because of the 20 pixels of padding. To fix that, we just need to use the calc function, which helps to return a value that is calculated from the subtraction of values with different units. Then we need to create the translation animation and make sure to add some delay to separate the two phases of the animation. This second text effect is also composed of two phases. Phase 1 is the stretching of the borders, and the second one is the translation of the text from outside the box. So one way of creating and animating the borders is to create two divs and put them on top of each other. The first div is going to have only border top and bottom, which we are going to scale horizontally, and the second div is going to have only border right and left, which we are going to animate by scaling the div vertically. The animation of the second phase doesn't need any explanation at this point. First, we need to set the container's position to relative because we are going to set the border's div's position to absolute. And here, to make the div take the size of the entire parent space, I used that trick where we put the top, left, right, and bottom properties of an absolute positioned element to 0. Or we can do the same using a shorthand property named inset and set its value to 0. And there we go, we have the top and bottom borders animation done. Now we need to do the same thing with the right and left borders, except that we are going to use the scale Y property this time. Now we just need to add some padding and translate the text from the bottom to the top. In this third animation effect, we are going to use a different way of creating borders by replacing the two divs by 4 HR elements. Again, since we are going to position the HR elements using the absolute value, we need to make sure the container's position is set to relative. Then we need to remove the default border styling of the HR elements and redo it manually. The first HR element is going to represent the top border, so its width must take the entire parent width and translate it all the way to the left. The second HR represents the right border, so we need to make it vertical by setting a height to it equal to the container's height and push it all the way to the bottom. Same thing needs to be done to the bottom and left borders. Then we need to use the translation property to create the animation of the borders. That done, now we need to apply the classic trick by setting the container's overflow to hidden to prevent the borders from appearing outside of it, and of course add some padding and use the opacity to add the fade-in effect to the text. This fourth animation is composed of 3 steps. The first one is to scale an overlay from the left side. The second step is to keep it in that state for a bit until the text appears. And the third step is to make it disappear by scaling it down from 0 to the right side. So as you see here, I made the overlay element absolute just so we can use the z-index property to put it on top of the text. And by the way, this is not needed unless the overlay and the text colors are different. Now, the first half of the animation time will be dedicated to scale up the overlay size to make it cover the entire container. In the next quarter of the time, nothing should be done. In the next 1% of the time, we need to change the direction of the animation. And then scale back the overlay size to 0 during the rest of the time. That done, now we need to add the fade-in text effect and make sure to add the delay, which is the time taken by the overlay to get the full size of the container. For this effect, we are going to use the overflow hidden trick, but this time each of the two parts of the text needs to have a wrapper with its overflow set to hidden, and then set a delay for the animation of the second text, and that's it pretty much. In this effect, we need to have a div positioned on top of the text which background color must be the same as the document background, and again we need to set the overflow of the container to hidden to prevent the overlay from colliding with the element on the right side of the container if there happens to be one in your design. In this animation, we just simply need to set a background color to the container. Then the animation is going to be a sequence of scaling the container vertically and the translation of the text after a certain delay. This text animation is composed of three phases. The first one is to show the fulfilled text, and during the second phase the text remains as it is for a bit, and then in the third phase only the stroke should remain. And of course we need to do that for each line and add some delay that increases from the top line to the bottom one. Now that we have the 5 spans, we need to fix the fonts and then make the text invisible black by setting the alpha value to 0. Then for the stroke, we are going to use the text stroke property, set the stroke size to 1 pixel and the color to black with the alpha also set to 0. First, the animation will start with an instant change of the color to fully visible black. Then it must stay like that until half of the animation time is passed. And then the filling color must disappear while the stroke color must be visible at the end of the animation. Now we need to apply the animation to the 5 spans with each one of them having a higher delay than the span that comes before it. In this animation we have the impression that the text is split, but in reality we are just simply having two spans containing the full text on top of each other. Then we have the top text translated 50% to the bottom and the bottom text translated 50% to the top, and using the overflow trick to cut half of the text so they appear like one entity. That said, we need to have a couple of spans containing the text wrapped each in a span, which overflow will be set to hidden to remove half of the text. Skew here is optional, just to add the inclination effect. Finally, this effect, as you can see, is composed of two phases. The first is a simple scale down animation, and the second phase is again another usage of the overflow property. So here we have each word in a span, wrapped each in another span, which serves as the delimiter. So first we are going to add the overflow property of the container to prevent the text from showing entirely at the beginning of the animation. Then we need to add the keyframes and set the scale back to 1. Then for the second phase of the animation we need to add the overflow property to the delimiters of the words. And then set back the display property of the spans to inline or inline block, because we set it to block earlier when we added the common styling part. And the next step we need to do is to simply translate the right text 100% to the left and the left text to the right, so they give the impression that they are behind the middle one, and then animate the translation. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.